across Europe. But it's because we have unfortunately been dealing with some very, very challenging issues in the United States, and now we're seeing some of these make their way to North America. And there's an old cliche, it can never happen here. It can't happen here. This is Sweden. And absolutely, yes, you are one of the most magnificent societies. You are an amazing society. But guess what? It is happening here. And I have to compliment, and I mean this sincerely, the chamber, because it took our chambers in the United States 20 years to finally make a determination that they have to work with the policing community, the law enforcement community, social services, because this is a holistic, whole community issue. And if you own a business in downtown Stockholm, if crime is up, if civil society determines that they are no longer safe, the trickle down, it could be absolutely catastrophic for society. Take a look at some of our cities. I'm not going to mention them because I'll be held accountable when I go back to the United States. I'll probably get a call from the mayor. But we have cities now that 3 years ago, people shopped, people played, people met, and today those downtown areas are destitute. They're empty. That's the impact. So we'll talk about some of these things later this afternoon. Right now I'm going to move very quickly, and then I'll introduce my colleagues when I'm at the end of the session through a PowerPoint. Why do we need to care about disinformation? Candidly, no, they can't see it here. Yeah, so let me keep going, which is tough to keep going without the. So really, disinformation is it spreads rapidly. The rise of social media. Over 40% of people surveyed in different regions of the world are concerned that it has caused polarization and more foreign influence in politics. So here's how I describe disinformation. Disinformation is described as that the French novel we all know. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. At our fingertips, we can find out why this pimple doesn't look good on our face. We can learn something about a foreign nation or about a people or about a person in seconds. That's the good news. The bad news is that hate, bigotry, and chaos were spread in a very different environment years ago. But here's what I'm going to tell you. It was how many years ago? A decade and a half in this little place called Rwanda, where a radio disc jockey, through sending disinformation through the radio waves before the internet was even where it was today, social media. Do you know how many people died at the hands, were butchered in a matter of weeks because of disinformation? And it's worse than that. So I'm going to have to move a little quickly now. So we all know disinformation refers to false, inaccurate, or misleading information. It can confuse and manipulate civil society, particularly in democratic societies. You see, extremists and bad actors know how to use democracy against us within our democracies. Freedom of speech. That's extremely important. The more the phenomena expands globally, the more multifaceted it becomes. It's not only some young 17-year-old sitting in a basement somewhere that happens to be a genius and can change the way people think. Or if you take a company, I won't mention a company, think of a company here in Sweden where information about that company is completely false, and there are young people sitting in some basement that start to spread the disinformation because they want to threaten the brand of that company. This is how things are changing. Overnight, the stock can go down. Overnight, the C-suite finds themselves in trouble. So we really find ourselves in a very different place now, or it can be a state actor. We're all talking about the war in Ukraine. The can of worms hasn't even opened yet. The best weapon that these state bad actors has is social media, the internet. You can move a people in a moment. Years ago, it was music. Today, it's social media. And by the way, I know you have a problem here with some of the music industry as well, but I'm not going to touch on that. But that, too, is disinformation. For the chamber, this is apropos. That's why it's interesting that you're here. You're here in the chamber hearing about this, because the chamber understood and understands in conversations we had months ago, this is a loss. If this continues without a counter narrative, without understanding the impact on civil society, your economy is going to be impacted if it's not impacted already. And that's why organizations like the Chamber are stepping up to say, we've got to educate the population to understand what, we're not going to tell you what's real, what's not, but at least at minimum, we're going to tell you where these threats are coming from. These are the bad actors, state, non-state actors, bolstered by targeted advertising, online mobs, and automated accounts known as fake news. So I think most of you know that. So what is the impact on the human dimension? What's the impact on civil society? What's the impact on rights, on human rights? And you can pretty much all read this. Disinformation diminishes the quality of democracy, saps trust in democratic institution, and distorts electoral processes, and fosters incivility and polarization online. Take a look at what's happened in the United States, sometimes overnight. We've had religious institutions attacked. We have had people shot and murdered and killed. There are over 150 assassinations of people from different religious groups around the world, including Breivik, in your neighbor here, Norway, where the common denominator between these assassins and these killers was a single website. Stormfront. People didn't realize that. A common denominator between the New Zealand shooter of a mosque on the other side of the world was a website, a single website. And just recently in Canada, we had an attack on a mosque. So, battlefields are changing. This is the new battlefield. That's the new battlefield. The new battlefield are these mimetic hybrids that are now out there on what's real and what's not. I think the quote speaks for itself. Disinformation and foreign interference are the soft underbelly of our democracy. You heard me say that. And I have to move a little quickly here. We talked about that. These are the actors: nation states, disinformation service providers, extremist groups, radicalized issue advocates. These are the motives. Disruption of economies. That's why you're here today. Destabilization of government, competitive edge, easy payday. This is what drives disinformation. This is why people and bad actors are involved in it. This is amazing. Think about this. On Twitter, a single post can now send an entire economy or military or local community into chaos. People can live or die by what happens here. I'm going to have to move a little quicker. So look, right here in your own backyard, September 2018. Junk news during your elections, your next election's coming up. Just watch the storm that's going to be coming at you. Social services and Muslim families. These are examples of disinformation campaigns to put people into chaos, to get people to not trust their government, to get people to not trust where they shop, to get people to change the way they live, where they pray, and how they interact with other members of their own society. This is an example, the power of the meme. The power of the meme. DARPA, which is our military think tank and is responsible for creating a lot of technology, years ago, before none of us even knew what the internet was, said, the power of the meme is going to change the way we fight wars or the way that we attack democracies, etc. So take a look at this, right? This is a meme. You just heard me say this, 2009 report, Mimetic Warfare. The New Zealand white supremacist terrorist who slaughtered dozens of Muslims said, Memes have done more for the ethno-nationalist movement than any manifesto. And you all know what I'm talking about. It was one of the worst anti-religious attacks in modern history in New Zealand just a couple of years ago. Meeting the challenge. A lie can travel around the world and back while the truth is lacing up its boots. We have to know about that. So how do we meet the challenge? What do I have? 3 minutes? 3 minutes. Developing and establishing new capabilities and defense measures. Good news is your government is doing that. Good news is we're working very closely with a lot of your colleagues here in academia and the government to address these issues, forecasting. We are very, very involved in that. I'm affiliated also with the Network Contagion Research Institute. You're going to hear from my partner here, Jack, that will talk to you a little bit about what we do. We are affiliated with Rutgers University. Real-time scaled social media data ingestion. These are tools that you're going to have and you're going to need to understand what the world is saying and to whom. It is not spying. This is open source, okay? All right, meeting the challenge. Governments, public officials have to invest in the public messaging, and elected and police officials must work with trusted community leaders, including faith-based, including civil society, and including why you're here today. Well, I did make it through there. So I want to thank you very much. We had a rush through it a little bit, but if you have any questions, we'll address them later. So I want to, you want to introduce Jack? Or?
Just stay here for a minute, please. Thank you very much, Paul.
Sure.
A very interesting perspective on this very important issue. Before we move to the next presentation, I would like to ask you one question. This presentation couldn't be more relevant today with the invasion of Ukraine and with Russia's constant disinformation towards their own people. But have Russia's attempts been as successful outside of their borders yet? You just told us that the can of worms hasn't opened yet, so...
So, yes, they have been successful. The Russians are very good at this. They've been doing this for years. An example is you've all been watching, I know you have, the world's been watching. I'm sure you're all aware of Floyd, Mr. Floyd, who was in fact murdered by unfortunately, by a police officer. It was a horrific case, and as someone who's worked in law enforcement for years, I'm not going to go into detail, but I completely understand why he was prosecuted and jailed. And this is why I'm saying this. That incident was used by bad actors in Russia and in other places to create chaos, to create hatred. We believe police officers were targeted for attack and assassination, vis-a-vis through foreign actors that took advantage of that situation to create chaos. So they had a keen understanding of who are the local police. They even knew names of local police. They even knew family members of local police. They meaning potentially the Russians. So the old cliche, don't give them much credit. I'm giving them a tremendous, I may not give them much credit, I'll go on record in the battlefield, but I will give them credit for how they're managing the battlefield of social media. We have not been as proactive as we should be in countering these narratives and countering these messages. Understand that an entire city or town or province can be turned upside down by just the click of a couple of buttons. Just a click of a couple of buttons. So to answer your question, they have absolutely been successful. They have created chaos abroad in North America, and I am confident that they will continue to do so. I'm singing to the choir is an American expression and an English expression. You are right next door, and I'm very happy to see and hear the amount of work that you're now doing in that area.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we will hear from Chief Jack Donoghue on what kind of threat disinformation is to corporate brands. And also to civil society and to the entire business community. Chief Donoghue is a senior fellow for strategy and technology at the Rutgers Center on Policing and a senior fellow at Rutgers Miller Center. You have served 32 years with the New York City Police, serving as a 3-star chief of strategic initiatives. You have also worked extensively in the cybersecurity space with developing the NYPD Cyber Intelligence Center of Excellence. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you so much, Frederick. And good morning, everybody. I want to thank the Chamber for inviting us and hosting us for today. And I'm glad to impart to you some of the experiences that we've had in the realm of cybersocial disinformation, cybersocial threats, and the risk that they pose to brands. Paul spoke very confidently, competently, and clearly about the threats to democracy that exist, how social media, the platforms, disseminate the disseminate disinformation, and how that can become a threat for democracy. I want to define it even more precisely, what disinformation is, and it simply is intentionally wrong information that is put out there. Misinformation, people can mistakenly repost information, can have a poor understanding, but when it is done intentionally with the knowledge that it is wrong, that truly is disinformation. We know that it has changed the outcomes of elections, and that is a grave concern to democracy. But I'm going to pivot, like I said, to speak to the threats and threat actors have to companies, brands, because disinformation actors, I'll explain who they are, have corporations and brands squarely in their sights, and what can be done in aiding them. I'm going to start with a story you may be familiar with. 5G is the new telecommunication standard that will be able to carry information much more quickly, rapidly, with more data, support interconnectivity in ways that we haven't seen before, and will absolutely transform the way we interact with computers. 5G has also been the target of conspiracy theories that have been virulent online and have had real-world consequences. And I'll start with a little story. Just before 2 o'clock in the morning, April of 2020, in a town in Britain called Derby, about 2 o'clock in the morning, police were called to the site of a newly built cellular tower. The country was under lockdown. Even criminals stayed home because they couldn't go out. But someone had recently set ablaze one of the 5G cell towers that were in that town. All over Europe in the succeeding months, 5G towers in Europe, in North America, were being set on fire in a bizarre crime spree. Who were the perpetrators? Well, they ultimately were identified in a number of instances. People, it was just normal people who, after consuming disinformation that was spread on the popular platforms, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, by users, sometimes celebrities, and even pro-Kremlin channels such as Russia Today, RT, spread that 5G causes cancer, COVID-19, and other illnesses. That content was so powerful that it prompted otherwise ordinary people and respectable people to engage in acts of destruction. There's literally no proof at all, scientific or otherwise, that says 5G causes any of these illnesses that I spoke about. And in fact, it required that some Swedish company had to react to the insinuation that that 5G cell towers and 5G technology causes those illnesses. And in fact, Ericsson had to do something about it. So now what we know is that it's happening to brands, and disinformation is pretty serious. Think about the risks and consequences to company. We know a lifetime can be spent building a brand's reputation. We know generations can be invested in building a company's reputation, regardless of whether it's locally based, whether it's a regional organization, a multinational corporation. Brands, corporate identity, reputation takes time to build. Marketers and communication experts know that it's a never-ending cycle to keep a brand, a company held in good stead. Companies are always building and shaping the world that they want to perceive how their product and their services are delivered and how people think about it. When you think about McDonald's in the old days when they had those signs, billions served, you can think about all the happy faces of people sinking their teeth into little hamburgers and French fries because they just tasted so good. Billions of people, billions of impressions. Leaves you with the idea that it was a trustworthy company and that food was good. Lots of customers, lots of brand equity there. But the challenges for brands and companies is that to nurture those connections requires interaction with people, just like all those smiling faces when they're having those hamburgers and French fries. But now information is being shifted right into palms of people's hands. It's their challenge to nurture those relationships with people through virtual means, because those relationships, those connections between brands and companies are capable of being manipulated. There's a reason why we call them social media influencers, because we know the power that they have in shaping people's impressions. It does influence, and what it does do, what one person can do online can shatter a company's reputation or brand image literally overnight. And think about that in terms of the power of social media and how many people are using it at any given time. You also have the threat actors that have the capability of standing up troll armies or using technologies such as bots that create inauthentic behaviors but are still pushing retweeted, recommented, or shared videos and content among and between those users, creating more and more interaction. What's taken literally years to build in brand equity that was earned over time and appropriately, what was nurtured over time, is at risk by inauthentic and sometimes authentic cybersocial risks. And those risks, just as I spoke about with the 5G example, aren't scientifically proven or as a result of strong journalistic integrity. It's as a consequence of the whim of people. It can be based on the whims of a crowd, or when we think about disinformation, nefarious actors. The Network Contagion Research Institute, the NCRI that Paul had alluded to, that is affiliated with Rutgers, found that there are well-designed and intentional goals of sensationalizing perhaps an extremely rare instance, which does happen. Sometimes something goes wrong with a brand, and usually marketing and customer service representatives can handle that. But they can be those one-off instances, which may be extremely and are, or more importantly, the ones that are fabricated, can cause those, can destroy a company or brand. So, who is intentionally spreading false information? There are disinformation service providers. It's actually a business. I'll talk a little bit more in a few moments. There are radicalized issue advocates or conspiracy theorists. I spoke about those. Think about the online conspiracy theorists who want to sell bombs or oils and essential oils to get you cured of COVID or to protect you from COVID. There are pump and dump fraudsters who manipulate stocks or manipulate companies' brands. There are business competitors who may, in fact, want to leverage disinformation to attack your brand, a brand. And then, of course, the powerful ones are the nation-state actors that get involved, or ones that are sponsored by nation states. So they give the arm's distance to it. And you can still see that there is an acceleration against those types of businesses. A recent analysis uncovered evidence of cybersocial influence operations designed to produce and spread thousands of videos of Chinese citizens denouncing foreigners and foreign companies that were critical of the Chinese government's treatment towards the Uyghur community. Videos that were banned in China appeared on a Chinese Communist Party news application indicating that it was meant for a Western audience. Those videos spread on Western media, platforms like Twitter, like YouTube, in the US, North America, and in Europe. Hundreds of thousands, and in some instances, millions of views of those videos were observed. The campaign targeted retailers that expressed concern about what was happening in Xinjiang, and hundreds of videos, like I said, flooded YouTube and TikTok. Behind it, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Among the targets, a well-known Swedish brand, H&M, where videos were posted criticizing H&M's clothing, but at the same time asking more of the and supporting the Chinese government. One of the most prolific posters involved in tweeting the information about H&M was an account that was created the very same day the hashtag boycott H&M went viral. So it started that morning, and by the end of the day, it was the most prolific Twitter account that was posting boycott H&M, tweeting in almost 550 times a minute about that brand and that particular, creating more impressions on the H&M brand. Sorry, let's go back. Disinformation as a service. I spoke very briefly about it, but there are service providers that you can hire to actually push out bad information. They are located they're located in certain countries in Southeast Asia, and there are also companies that will enable this because they use bot-like behavior or well as troll farms to push out that information. 70%, Paul's presentation alluded to it, fake news is 70% more likely to be retweeted than real news. People can't distinguish between real information and fake information when it's literally pushed to the palms of their hands. And when we look towards the future, when you think about technology that's going to enable deep fakes and algorithms that will specifically target individuals, the role of disinformation as a service providers will become more problematic. Disinformation can start as comedy. A Twitter post from a posting from a Twitter person, employee, about an IKEA store because they had put in the store a labyrinth that you couldn't get out of. If you're familiar with the layout in an IKEA store, it sounds funny, and it may not have had a long-term impact, but it was picked up by news media in the town in the United States where it was, and it amplified. It shows how even humor can turn viral against a company. So who is doing this, and why would they do it? Obviously for financial gain, to disrupt the markets, or conspiracies, as I alluded to. How large of a problem is disinformation? In a report from Kroll International regarding fraud and risk, they surveyed 588 risk management executives in global organizations. 27% responded that adversarial social media had affected a company's bottom line in the prior year. Think about this. Many consumer companies have stood up consumer affairs departments trying to find out about early warnings about growing negative publicity, and to do so in an environment to respond more rapidly to it. Those are taxed, those are capacities in organizations that are highly taxed and incredibly necessary now. So how can you be responsive or preventative with respect to disinformation? You have to get the whole C-suite involved. When you're thinking about a corporation, you're talking about brands, you have to have your chief security officers, because these threats can go kinetic. It can result in damage to property, as I started off with, or damage to brands. So you need your marketing executives, your communications people, your general counsels need to be involved, because it's a whole of organization response that needs to be built in. But more importantly, it also has to have the ability to be flexible, because the threat may not come from your normal way of happening. It's almost like whack-a-mole. They can reappear from time to time. It's the challenge for a company to know what's the best way to respond, and that's why relying on your communications and marketing experts is incredibly important. And lastly, the ability to continually surveil and understand that network, the ability to forecast what's going to happen with your brands, because, like I said, it can be that one tweet that's actual, real information about a rare occurrence, or it could be a targeted campaign, and remaining flexible over time will be a key to success for corporations. I want to thank you for your time, and if we have any questions, thank you so much, Frederick.
Just say here, Jack.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I mean, this topic hits very close to home for us here at the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce, especially in terms of our member companies, of course. What would you say are the most important steps that a company can take to tackle disinformation threats? I know it's an extremely big question, and the last slide here was about that, but want to hear something more.
Certainly. The ability to have the continuous surveillance that I speak about. Organizations, brands, companies will always have the unfortunate experiences with unhappy customers. And the idea of dealing with them on a one-off opportunities to reset and recalibrate with an individual is something that almost every business is designed to deal with. But the at-scale, global approach is something that even small organizations have to have some capacity for. Because what happens online can turn kinetic. And that idea that to have some degree of understanding of what's in your social media ecosphere, or how social media is impacting your individual brand, is important. I'll give the example. In a small pizzeria in a city in the United States, a conspiracy theory was focused on that there was a criminal activity that was happening inside this single pizzeria. And what it prompted was an individual to show up at that simple pizza shop with a machine gun, trying to save the people that this supposed activity was happening to in that pizza store. So the idea that a small pizzeria was the focal point of a conspiracy theory that resulted in someone taking action is a demonstration of how powerful messaging can be online, how it can push people to action, how it can influence. And global brands have that capacity, or at least are trying to. It's even the small regional or the smaller stores that still have to wrap themselves around monitoring what's happening to them and having the capacity to do so. Thankfully, there are organizations that are able to forecast that, like the group that's affiliated with Rutgers. But it is a growing concern because we know that social media is not going to go anywhere. The value of virtual reality is going to be coming soon, and what is embedded in that is going to be equally as powerful as an influencer. So I think there really does need to be a whole of organization effort with forecasting abilities to understand what even very limited amounts of information that's in social media can influence people. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jack. Now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Serge Blaise. We talked about your first name and the pronunciation of that, and you can correct me if you do. But Mr. Blaise,
not Sergei these days.
That's better. Okay, Mr. Blaise, you're the Executive Director of the University of Ottawa, Professional Development Institute. Welcome to the stage in your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Très heureux d'être ici. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des francophones dans la salle, peut-être à l'ambassade. Listen, what I'm presenting here is a project that is happening. Okay, so this is not a solution to disinformation, but it's our contribution, we think, as Canada, to the fight on disinformation, understanding disinformation. A quick picture of the University of Ottawa. The president sits in the beautiful building at the front, but we have the top floor of the other building at the back. So I think we're in good position there. This presentation is also an invitation, okay? More than a presentation, in fact, okay? An invitation because this initiative that we're starting is meant to be multinational, international, multi-level. We like to include, as we'll see in a moment, speakers from or participants from government, from industry, from academia, public sector, not NGOs. And what we're building here is a hub in Canada that is centered in Canada, but brings together participants from various countries around the world. Right now, the three active players are Canada, the US, so the NCRI, as you've heard before, and Sweden from the, more specifically, the Institute for Future Studies, where Mr. Amir Rastami is. These are the three first partners, if you will, of the Institute, but our goal is to expand further and go to UK, France, Australia, and New Zealand. You'll notice that Russia is not there. Maybe eventually, but not now. Not now. Okay. So the first thing that we want to emphasize as we embark on this journey is that countering disinformation must not limit freedom of expression and the right to legitimate dissent. That is very, very important. Everybody and their grandmother are talking about disinformation these days. And there is a danger that we might get into what we call the disinformation industry. Okay, where everything all of a sudden becomes disinformation. Every little lie becomes disinformation, okay? And that kind of dilutes the concept of disinformation if we're not careful. If we overuse the word disinformation, it'll lose its value, okay? It'll lose its impact, okay? Very important that as a democratic society, we respect the right to dissent. We respect even polarizing ideas we don't like to hear, okay? But we have to put them out in the open. We have to have very open, transparent, forceful debate. That's what has advanced our democracies in the past, and we certainly don't want to get into the censorship business, if you will. One of the first things that we're doing, and as I said, this is a new project. This is not something that has been there for years. This is just a very recent project, is to look at definitions, to agree on terms, because already we're seeing in the media that terminology is used in various ways, and there is some confusion sometimes as to what is disinformation. So what we are working along is a continuum of disinformation, if you will. Okay, so to the left is misinformation, and we can argue about all these terms, and I won't have a time to discuss them in detail. But misinformation, which is typically erroneous and typically unintended. Okay, so this is something, for example, you might have heard about the Canadian so-called freedom convoys, where the truckers invaded Parliament Hill in Canada. Okay, well, there was a story that went around that a woman was killed by a police horse. The police used horses, and a woman was trampled and died. Okay, and that circulated. It started incredibly, not in Canada, but in the US, in a particular network that has 3 letters but shall remain unnamed. But and then was quickly picked up by the venerable New York Times, for example. So a woman was killed by a horse. That was an error. Okay, there was no woman. She fell back not because of a horse, because there was 2 feet of snow in the street. Okay, because they weren't able to clear the street. But the other networks picked it up and said, we are correcting. Okay, the woman didn't even go to the hospital. There was no injury. This was misinformation. It circulated for about a day, but then was called off, if you will. And then you have the good old spin, political spin, where you put, you don't necessarily lie, but you just choose some truths over others, making your candidate look good, for example. So we wouldn't call that disinformation, although it is a little bit from some people's perspective. Then you get into the ideological, the conspiratorial, which is, good old propaganda meant to sow doubt. Propaganda is typically, or sometimes not even meant to convince, but to just create a bit of doubt, to just create a bit of confusion and destabilization. You then got into the undermining trust level, where you have insidious targets, where you start targeting things very specifically. It's not just general ideological conversation all of a sudden, but you're targeting government, you're targeting institutions, you're targeting judges, for example, and saying that they're crooked, they're corrupt, or something like that. Okay? It becomes a bit more focused. Then you get into reputational, where people are intimidated. They're publicly shamed on social media. Defamation, and at this level here, this becomes prosecutorial. You could prosecute around here, maybe not over there, but here you enter the world of lawlessness, if you will. It can lead, in some cases, fortunately, not that often, but it can lead to calls for action, for angry mobilization. That starts getting a little bit uglier, and of course inciting violent actions, illegal riots, insurgency, and that's when it gets very ugly, and that's when our police officers come in. So as I said, the approach is meant to be very collaborative. Academia, of course, from a university's perspective, is an important contributor. And this is where we have participants, researchers, scholars from various fields. Faculty of Law is there, communication, forensic psychology, ethics, even history, okay, will be there to talk about disinformation, but from different perspectives, okay? Everybody has a different perspective on disinformation. We have industry who is there to lead research and development, innovation. We're thinking, for example, about using artificial intelligence. A lot of disinformation these days is AI-enabled, right? AI-driven. So we have to have AI tools to counter, or at least identify disinformation, so like fighting fire with fire, so to speak. But this is where industry comes in, doing some risk management protocols, including disinformation in your risk management protocols. And of course, we'll put the social media platforms in there as industry leaders as well. The impact of social media for industry is huge. Elon Musk didn't pay $44 billion just because it was a cute little toy. And that's another topic we could talk about, where the richest man in the world buys the most important communication network in the world. There's something Orwellian about it. I don't know, like a Kafkaesque. I don't want to get too mystical about it, but there's something scary to me anyway about that. And then governments, of course, government have an important role to play in policy making, coordinating, because the one thing that is missing, at least in Canada, is a coordinated approach to disinformation. Right now, it's pretty piecemeal and fragmented. International cooperation, and of course, good old funding. We need money to do this research and advance the topic. This is just a quick snapshot of where the network is as we speak today. It'll be bigger than that tomorrow and bigger still the day after. We are bringing in several organizations. You see that NCRI is there, the Institute for Future Studies here in Sweden, and a few others. These are all people who are focused on understanding disinformation, helping people understand disinformation, but also doing something about it. We don't want this thing to be just a think tank. It's got to be there's got to be some action associated with it. So what are the products of the Information Integrity Lab? Awareness building is a big thing, okay? And that starts in schools, okay? High schools, universities. The province of Quebec in Canada has it in the school curriculum at grade 6 or 7, where kids are about 10 years old, to develop critical thinking when they're on social media, to understand that it isn't because it's on your screen that it's necessarily true. So it's already in the curriculum. Not elsewhere in Canada, but at least one province is doing that. Briefing, white papers, reports, we need the world decision makers, especially corporate leaders, government leaders, to understand what information is and is not. And then Paul alluded to the notion of B2B real-time monitoring and analytics. Companies may want, for example, to know what's being said about them on social media. Are there calls for violence? Are there threats? Or is the brand being attacked, as Jack said? So this entity will do some of that. And then when I talk about capacity building capacity means building technology, new technologies. There is no way that we can counter disinformation by a simple human intervention. There's just too much of it out there, and we will have to have some technological advances to make a difference. These are some of the main clients, if you will, of the Information Integrity Lab. One that isn't there, a good friend of mine, is the chief librarian of the National Archives of Canada. Her big problem, he says, librarians like to catalog things, right? Okay, how do you catalog disinformation? Her expression is, how do you catalog bullshit? I'm not going to say this here, in this beautiful environment, but if you know that it's blatantly false, you still have to give it a code or something like that, and that makes her life quite miserable. Okay. I don't need to go over this. Jack made the case that disinformation defense has to be part of the integrated risk management protocol of any good company, large or small, local, international. And voila, this is where you can reach me if you want to play in this game. We would like to welcome you in. As I said, we are hoping for this entity to be multinational and gender balanced too, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serge. Serge, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I've been called all kinds of things.
Indeed, stay for one question just. Indeed, increased partnerships and cooperations is needed on many fronts, of course, but maybe particular in this to fight this kind of disinformation. You mentioned that companies should treat disinformation defense just like any other type of risk, like financial or legal risks. Are we seeing a change, do you think, where companies are giving more attention to these unconventional risks?
I think companies are with disinformation today as they were 10 years ago with cybersecurity. 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, every company knew about cybersecurity. It was a pesky little problem. You would leave your technical people to look into that. It wasn't a consideration for the C-suite, for the CEO of a company. Cybersecurity was considered a little technical problem. I think cybersecurity is the same thing. Unfortunately, companies will start paying attention when some of them go down because of disinformation. That's where other companies are going to say, wait a minute, something's happening here, okay? And not just to be cute about it, but the work that you're doing here at Chamber of Commerce, for example, speaking to the corporate world about the importance of this. It is as important as cybersecurity. Disinformation literacy is as important as financial literacy if you're going to run a business. That's my perspective anyway.
Okay,
Voilà.
Thank you. Thank you
Merci.
very much. Our final presentation for this morning will be given by Brian Harrell. And I was corrected, I said he was from Canada earlier, but he's from United States. I'm sorry for that. But you're not here, Brian, so because we will have him on a short film remote here. Mr. Harrell is the Vice President and Chief Security Officer at the energy company Avangrid, a leading sustainable energy company in the United States.
We did see manipulation, but we did not necessarily see where one vote was changed to a different vote for a different candidate. But we did see the Russian GRU and Russian troll farms create thousands of social media accounts to try and influence. Hundreds of thousands of posts were seen on Facebook and Twitter. We also saw the GRU infiltrate IT systems at the Democratic National Committee, or DNC. This was really designed to help Bernie Sanders have a leg up on Hillary Clinton. This resulted in a bit of a wake-up moment for the United States. We knew that in 2020 that they were going to be back. So between 2017 and 2020, we created a robust network of trusted professionals, an ISAC, an Information Sharing and Analysis Center. We created key relationships with all secretaries of state and county election officials. We're better prepared today because of the aggressive outreach campaign that we undertook to reach out, to talk, to create consistency in cyber reporting, provide analysis of intrusions, and really provide that security funding and money to local governments. Additionally, I think here might be just a few notable insights that I'd love to share with you. Number one, nation states are absolutely interested in your elections. The public-private partnership needs to be strong between the Swedish security services, the National Security Service, local election officials, and social media companies. If you don't have a relationship now with the social media companies that are out there, I know they are willing to have that conversation back and forth, and now is the time to do it. You need to take a moment now to do the threat and the vulnerability assessments in order to mitigate risk and address gaps in your security. Additionally, adding sensors to your systems to monitor inbound and outbound IP traffic. If you haven't done so already, you should really consider building a information sharing and analysis center. I would also consider establishing a rumor control website where citizens can go to decipher fact from fiction as it relates to election integrity. Next, work to understand third-party risk. Where are we getting election machines? Is the software that we're currently using, is it patchable, or is it so legacy and so old that we can't possibly use it? And then, are your vendors on speed dial? If something goes bump in the night and you have a major problem, they are going to be the first or second phone call you make behind law enforcement and information and intelligence services to try and fix and mitigate the problem. So have those relationships now under blue sky conditions. And lastly, have the ability to manually operate. I think one of the major lessons learned here in the United States from the recent colonial pipeline attack is that we must be able to operate in a manual state. And I will tell you that elections are no different. We must operate in a zero trust environment. I will tell you that our citizens expect that of us. And with that, and lastly, and probably most importantly, good luck. Create the relationships now. Do the hard legwork when it comes to threat and vulnerability assessments. And just know that nation state adversaries will be looking at your election infrastructure and trying to persuade your voters. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you too, Brian. And I'm really apologize for the technical problems in the beginning of this film. And thank you also, Paul, Jack, and Serge for the very interesting presentations. As we already have mentioned, we have an election coming up in Sweden in September this year. Disinformation is a growing problem in general, as we have heard, but especially this year in Sweden, we are worried about this kind of misleading information. I mean, an election is like a tribute to democracy and to the truth. Therefore, disinformation and fake news in connection with an election is like threats directed at democracy, exactly as you said in the beginning of your speech, Paul. So now we will discuss disinformation in general, but also this kind of election disinformation. We'll do that with two Swedish experts, Hanna Linderstål from the company Earhart Business Protection Agency, and Björn Palmertz from the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency. I'll turn into Swedish now, but if you are our honorable guests here, if you don't understand every word in Swedish after like 1 or 2 days here, you will have help with this simultaneous translation in your headphones. Så, välkommen säger jag då till Hanna Linderstål. Du är som sagt expert på desinformation och cybersäkerhet på Earhart Business Protection Agency. Och det är ett bolag som arbetar med att lära och hjälpa företag och myndigheter att hantera informationspåverkan och virtuella hot. Och jag säger också välkommen till Björn Palmertz, som sagt från den relativt nystartade Myndigheten för psykologiskt försvar, där du arbetar på den operativa avdelningen. Säga skall också att du har tidigare arbetat som officer inom Försvarsmakten och även forskat och undervisat på Försvarshögskolan, samt har lång erfarenhet även från privat verksamhet, företag, näringsliv. Jag börjar med att vända mig till dig, Björn. Berätta kort vad den här nystartade Myndigheten för psykologiskt försvar sysslar med.
Först är det nog värt att klarifiera att efter Ukraina, den första ryska angreppen mot Ukraina 2014, så startade MSB en enhet för skydd mot informationspåverkan. Och det är den enheten som skapade grunden i den nya myndigheten. Så det är inte en helt ny förmåga. Däremot är uppdraget breddat. Historien går ju hela vägen tillbaka till en utredning 1953 ungefär, där man under kalla krigets period satte en förmåga att bygga ett psykologiskt försvar. Det vill säga att möjliggöra för hela samhället att stå emot vad då kallades propaganda och vad idag definierar som otillbörlig informationspåverkan eller påverkanskampanjer. Och det är för att särskilja lite mot desinformation som är en komponent i det här. Men när vi tittar på statsaktörer eller aktörer utanför vårt land, vilket är vår myndighets uppdrag, så behöver vi tydliga benämningar för att särskilja det från exempelvis generell desinformation eller missinformation som sker inom ett lands gränser eller över gränser, just för att understryka det som nämndes tidigare med att värna yttrandefriheten. Ska vi skydda demokratin och tydliggöra när någon vill oss illa, så måste vi också använda demokratiska metoder och öppenhet och transparens.
Vi hörde ju Jack Donahue nyss här att desinformation riktar sig mycket mot företag och varumärken. Är det någonting som vi märker av i Sverige, och är det i sådana fall också någonting som innefattas av din myndighets ansvarsområden?
Ja, det var en mycket bra dragning av några av de exempel som är viktiga. Vi har också sett under pandemin hur ledande läkemedelsbolag både från Sverige, Storbritannien och USA har använts av auktoritära stater för att försöka smutskasta västvärlden generellt, men också för att försöka i en kamp om vaccin som en utrikespolitisk marknadsföringsverktyg försöka påverka länder nästan genom att gå via att angripa läkemedelsbolag i informationsmiljön. Så absolut, och ur samhällsperspektivet, vilket är det ansvarsområde som jag verkar inom, så blir det ju högst intressant när man ser att företag exempelvis inom kritisk infrastruktur, inom telekommunikation och andra oerhört centrala delar av samhället används som verktyg för att på ett bredare sätt försöka påverka nationer eller beslutsfattande i nationer, opinioner i nationer. Och det är ju helt klart, om vi tittar på några av de exempel som har funnits, att det är en farhåga.
Och vilka skulle du säga ligger bakom de desinformations- och påverkanskampanjer som vi ser i Sverige idag? Är det statsaktörer, skulle du säga, främmande makt, eller är det andra aktörer? Eller hur ser den mixen ut, så att säga?
Och det här kommer ju in i det här begreppet igen. Om vi pratar om påverkanskampanjer som vi försöker använda för att visa på att det här är någonting som utgör ett hot, det vill säga kommer utifrån landet och försöker att påverka vår opinion, vårt beslutsfattande, vårt lands intressen på ett menligt sätt. Då är det ju statsaktörer men också icke-statliga aktörer som exempelvis kan försöka underblåsa våldskapital och kanske har en önskan att få en förändring i statsskick och sådana saker som utifrån landets gränser kan försöka hälla bränsle på samhällsutmaningar och skeenden som inträffar i landet. Och det har vi ju sett lite exempel på i närtid.
Tack. Hanna, otillbörlig informationspåverkan och desinformation är väl någonting som frodas i de digitala medier och kanaler som vi har. Det är i varje fall min bild att det så att säga får en väldigt snabb och bred spridning i dem. Eller vad säger du om det?
Jag kan bara säga ja.
Det är ett bra svar.
Nej, men alltså, man tittar på utvecklingen. Jag skrev min första riskanalys om påverkansoperationer via chattkanalen 1999. Och då skrattade min chef som jag hade då och sa lite det är ju sånt som ungdomar håller på med. Men jag sa att det finns ett sätt att påverka människor. Det blir väldigt nära när man jobbar i sociala medier. Vi har låtit våra sociala medieplattformar utvecklas utan regler, utan riktlinjer, hur som helst i världen och har makten över vårt data och vår kommunikationslandskap. Det är någonstans där vi måste börja titta. Vi har lagt själen för vår kommunikation i händerna på näringsliv som ägs av någon som kanske har en agenda eller påverkas av en agenda eller som kanske köps.
Och då har mängden desinformation också exploderat i takt med framväxten av digitala kanaler.
Ja, är det någon här som inte har sociala medier idag?
Nej. Och då kommer vi också vidare då till alltså att i varje fall när man tänker på en cyberattack, i varje fall så som jag tänker på det, då tänker jag liksom att det är en attack mot kritisk infrastruktur som slås ut. Typ liksom att elen stängs av eller att transportmedel slås ut eller att medie- och kommunikationskanaler slutar att fungera. Men inget av det jag pratar om här nu kan väl liksom klassas som desinformation?
Nej, men vi måste skilja på desinformation och cyberattacker. Samtidigt som det ofta binds samman. Du kan göra en cyberattack, till exempel störa kritisk infrastruktur, störa betalsystemet, varför inte kritiska funktioner i betalsystemet som bank-ID, för att sen sprida på nätet. Den här skiten funkar ju inte, det här kan man inte lita på. Klarar de inte av sitt jobb? Hur ska vi betala i framtiden? Eller vad det nu är för någonting. Du kan använda det för att skapa, nu säger jag inte att du ska bli hacker och börja trolla på nätet, men du kan använda cyberattacker för att skapa förtroendekriser och polarisering i samhället. Men sen kan du också se cyberattacker kan vara på mindre nivå. Du kan ha ett litet företag och bli collateral damage in the system. Att du är inte viktig, men att du är trasig gör att systemet ser lite sämre ut. Så det är bra för en aktör.
Så att i någon mening kan man säga att det du säger är att det finns ofta ett samband mellan, liksom samverkan mellan en cyberattack och en desinformations...
Det behöver du inte alltid göra. Du kan ju såklart finnas helt vanliga... Jag kan ta något exempel på en som inte är en cyberattack. Vi hade exemplet med 5G towers. 5G-torn som har brunnit i Europa. Jag gjorde den här analysen, jag började med den 2018 faktiskt, så jag var lite före innan det började brinna och skrev att vi tror att det kommer brinna torn i Europa, kontaktade telekomsektorn och sa att det här ser lite risk ut. I början av pandemin spreds det ett rykte om att det till och med så att pandemin var fejk, att det var strålningsskador. Det började i januari 2020. Det ändrades ganska snabbt till att man istället sa att nej, vi blir svaga, vårt immunförsvar blir svaga av de här tornen. Och så började det hända saker. Folk blev arga. Och det var ju som precis föregående talare sa, att det var gemene man. Någon ute där som har läst, kanske orolig för sina barn, sin familj. Jag går ut och bränner ner det. Och en och annan ungdom som var trött på att sitta hemma och ville göra någonting. Mellan mars 2020 till mars 2021 så brann det ner 330 mobiltorn i världen. Det är ganska mycket. Och det var bara ett rykte i sociala medier. Det var ingen cyberattack. Det var bara ett rykte som fick spridning. När vi pratar en cyberattack, då handlar det mer om systematiskt störa systemet. Många små nålstick på olika ställen som gör att det känns lite opålitligt.
Björn, i Sverige, vi har ju pratat om att vi ska komma in lite grann på det här med att vi faktiskt har ett val i Sverige också. Om 4,5 månad rättare sagt. Har ni sett några tendenser till påverkan riktade just mot valet och valrörelsen än?
I nuläget så är det vi har sett är en ganska låg nivå av informationspåverkan kopplat till valet. Nu ska vi ju tänka att det var väl få av oss som räknade med en myndighetsstart som inkluderade extremislamistiska påverkanskampanjer mot socialtjänsten i Sverige, en invasion från Ryssland in i Ukraina och det internationella utfall som kommer av det här och kommer att påverka under lång tid. Dessutom en livlig diskussion och en politisk ställningstagande som ska ske rörande NATO-medlemskap från både Finland och Sverige. De här aspekterna förändrar ju på många sätt valet. Sen kan man ju också säga att Ryssland har haft väldigt mycket att göra med att rikta sig inom sitt land och mot Ukraina i nuläget. Det kan komma att förändras och därför så måste man lite för att koppla till nästan samtliga tidigare talare, det går väldigt, väldigt fort. Det innebär att tro att man kan vara effektiv att svara upp mot någonting om man inte är förberedd. Det är väldigt svårt när vi pratar om informationspåverkan eller desinformation generellt ur ett näringslivsperspektiv. Man måste jobba upp möjligheterna till omvärldsbevakning, analys och förmåga att svara upp vad gäller strategisk kommunikation eller agerande. För det är ju den bästa kommunikationen ibland, att faktiskt göra någonting som stämmer överens med det man säger.
Ja, intressant. Det var ju, förstår jag, också en väldigt intensiv start då på myndigheten med allting det du talar om här. Men kan man säga något generellt om syftet med desinformation som riktas mot, i det här fallet då Sverige, inför ett val? Är syftet med en påverkanskampanj att gynna en viss sida inom politiken, eller handlar det mer allmänt om att skapa splittring, polarisering och kaos?
Både och skulle jag säga. Som nämndes tidigare så har vi ju tydliga exempel på att aktörer som Ryssland har försökt gynna vissa kandidater eller göra det svårare för andra kandidater i val med användning av informationspåverkan av olika slag. Men ett annat sätt är också, och det såg vi också i USA 2016, att försöka minska det politiska deltagandet bland vissa grupper. Vi ser också det från vissa internationella extremistorganisationer som vill att det här landet representerar inte dig, delta inte i val för då stödjer du liksom någonting du inte vill stå för och sådär. Och det kan ju innebära ett stort demokratiskt problem. En annan aspekt är ett ökat misstroende mot demokratiska institutioner och principer. En mer långsiktig aspekt där val, eftersom det är en sån viktig länk i en kedja av händelser, spelar en roll utanför bara just den händelsen. Det blir en extra stark debatt under valtider. Många frågor lyfts. Nyhetsrapporteringen ser annorlunda ut etc. Och därför kan det vara attraktivt att gå mot det vad gäller informationspåverkan. Dessutom kan man försöka undergräva förtroendet för samhällsfunktionalitet. Man kan också försöka misskreditera de institutioner som är ansvariga för valgenomförandet eller andra aktörer relaterade för att valresultatet då ska verka mindre trovärdigt bland en befolkning exempelvis. Och om man slår ihop alla de där på sikt så kan det också, om man tittar på en grand strategy-aspekt av det här, så kan det ju vara att man helt enkelt försöker minska sammanhållningen i ett land, vilket gör att de blir en svagare motvikt internationellt mot exempelvis en auktoritär regims utrikespolitiska vilja.
Tack. Hanna? Det skiljer väldigt mycket mellan olika generationer och åldrar när det gäller hur de tar till sig politisk information, det vill säga de facto information som gäller de facto hur de kommer att rösta då. Internetstiftelsen visade i en undersökning nyligen att bland ungdomar födda efter millennieskiftet så är just sociala medier den enskilt viktigaste kanalen, alltså viktigare än tv, radio, tidningar, både print och papper så att säga, för att ta till sig politisk information. Och så har jag hört dig säga att sociala medier i allmänhet, TikTok i synnerhet, är plattformar där mest desinformation sprids. Innebär det att unga utsätts för mer desinformation än äldre?
Ja, det beror lite på. Vi kan säga så här. unga och äldre har olika sätt att hantera information. När min mamma som är född på 40-talet tittar på information, det har jag läst så det är sant. Men när min 16-åring hemma ser någonting på TikTok så kan hon säga det är inte säkert det är sant. Men hon matas med mycket större mängd. Men impacten är annorlunda. Det som jag kan tycka är läskigt när du säger TikTok, för TikTok är fantastiskt spännande som plattform, för algoritmerna bakom TikTok är någonting helt annorlunda. Det går inte att jämföra med Facebook. Titta nu på kriget i Ukraina så kan man se att kommunikationen till ungdomar i Västeuropa ser helt annorlunda ut mot kommunikationen till ungdomar som har tillgång till TikTok, till exempel i Ryssland och andra stater som kanske har ett annat narrativ och en annan bild av vad som händer i Ukraina. Det är väldigt mycket makt i de här plattformarna och det är det jag menar med att mycket av ansvaret ligger på plattformen.
Så det blir selektivt?
Väldigt selektivt. Ja. Sen kan du se på vart är vi och läser. Jag menar, det kanske är så att vi som är lite över 20 kanske är på Facebook i första hand. Några av oss är på Twitter. Jag vet att Twitter är en mäktig plattform. Men det är en liten plattform. Det är mest politiker, journalister och förståsigpåare som är där. Och det är klart att det står mycket om Twitter i media. För det är den lättaste plattformen att analysera. Jag kan sätta mig här och dra fram stora grafer och algoritmer från Twitter. För det tar mig några sekunder. Att analysera Facebook, TikTok och de andra tar väldigt lång tid. Så det är svårt att analysera. Men tittar vi där. Då har vi de äldre är oftast på de här lite traditionella. Medan ungdomarna de vill ha video. Det ska vara snabbt och enkelt och lite aptitligt. Men påverkansdelen är ju förhållandevis ungefär lika stor. Ungdomarna matas kanske med mer. Men de kanske inte är lika receptiva. Dessutom, de flesta ungdomar i skolan idag pratar om det här.
Jag måste också bara fråga dig, för Sverige är ju ändå ett av världens mest digitaliserade länder, det beror lite grann på hur man mäter, men ändå. Men hur står det egentligen till med beredskapen här i Sverige för cyber- och desinformationsattacker, skulle du säga?
Det ska inte jag svara på nu. Prata beredskap.
Cyberattacker då?
Om vi tittar på näringsliv då. Ja. Jag jobbar väl kanske både med myndigheter och näringsliv generellt. Men om vi tittar på... jag skulle säga så här. Sverige är fantastiskt digitala i framkant. En bland de bästa i världen på den delen. Och väldigt naiva. Och vi har en cybersecurity-skuld att betala, hörde jag en branschkollega sa på KTH. Jag tycker att det är där vi är nu. Vi måste snäppa upp. Och den viktigaste saken vi kan göra, det är inte att köpa nya system, det är att öka kunskap.
Jag måste fråga dig också, Hanna. Alltså, vilseledande information och attacker, det är ju på något vis det initiala problemet, säger jag. Men sen kommer ju en annan utmaning. Hur man kan kontrollera om någonting är sant. Alltså, vems ansvar, undrar man ju då, är det att korrigera desinformation? Är det Björn och hans myndighet, du ska få svara på det sen, eller är det mediekanalerna som sprider desinformation, till exempel då de sociala medierna, eller är det någon annan? Har du någon kommentar på det?
Jag tycker det där var en ledande fråga, för det är så här, ska du reglera demokrati med icke-demokratiska medel, tänker jag. Alltså, är censur rätt väg att gå verkligen? Det känns inte jättebra i magen faktiskt. Någonstans så känns det som någonting helt annat än en öppen demokrati. Jag tycker vi ska lägga ansvar på våra plattformar. Men vi kanske ska fundera på vem står bakom ett konto. Hur många konton är det den här aktören driver? Jag menar, jag vet inte hur många av er som har tittat på en botfarm till exempel. En botfarm, det är massor med konton som styrs av en aktör, oftast digitalt. Och den som styr det här brukar man kalla för en herde, som man herdar får ungefär. Får en sån person ha lika mycket talan på nätet, alltså en digital person som inte finns, som en riktig person? Är det så att vi kanske ska ha identiteter? Alltså vi måste börja fundera på andra sätt att tänka kring det här. Sociala medier är lite som biltrafiken var. För 100 år sedan så var det väl kanske någon som körde bil i början, och det var väl så vi började med internet på 90-talet och körde runt och vi behövde inga regler. Men idag är det ganska uppstyrt och du måste ha körkort. Det kanske är något vi ska fundera på online.
Jag ställer frågan därför att jag tycker det är lite intressant. Det har ju varit presidentval i Frankrike precis här nu. Och där har man ju pratat mycket om, om just desinformation inför det valet. Och behovet av att det finns någon form av domare i samhället. Och där visade det sig att 21 stycken mediebolag gick samman för att då så att säga arbeta med faktagranskning och även motarbeta desinformation. Hanna?
Det försökte vi i Sverige förra valet. Faktiskt.se var ett initiativ ifrån ett antal mediehus i Sverige. Men om de som startade det initiativet hade gjort lite cybersecurity-tänk innan, så hade de bokat faktiskt.eu som poppade upp några timmar senare och spred samma information med ett annat narrativ och såg nästan likadan ut. Så att man kan snubbla lite på målsnöret. Jag tror väldigt mycket på att prata om det här. Jag tycker censur personligen är väldigt läskigt. Jag tycker att det är en läskig väg att gå. Men vi har byggt det här monstret av sociala medier som styr våra kommunikationskanaler. Vi måste börja hantera det nu.
Björn, vad säger du det här med domar i samhället? Är ni på Myndigheten för psykologiskt försvar någon form av den rollen, så att säga?
Nej.
Nej.
Och det är en av aspekterna, att vi jobbar väldigt mycket genom andra i samhället, och det är civilsamhället som är den trovärdigaste aspekten att skydda och kommunicera om. Det är en dialog, en debatt, och det är den debatten vi ska skydda, men vi ska inte gå in och styra i det. För då tror jag vi hamnar i en situation som ingen av oss i våra länder vill ha. Däremot så är det ju viktigt och en aspekt som jag tror man kan hjälpa generellt sett utan att kliva över den där gränsen, det är att stödja forskning, stödja uppbyggnaden av kunskap, visa på att underrättelseforskning, cyber och påverkan hänger ihop för att minska de glappen som vi har i samhället, inte bara mellan myndigheter med olika kompetens och kulturer, man har gått i olika skolor, olika specialisering, utan också mellan företag. Där ibland kanske ett väldigt bra benchmarking för att förstå ett cyberhot eller förstå potentiell påverkan är ett företag med en annan inriktning som har råkat ut för någonting. Och kan man ha en relation där, då kan man bli bättre på att ligga på förhand och ha en medvetenhet. Och kanske också höja upp de här problemen till ledningsgruppen.
Tycker ändå att den här frågan är intressant. Vi hörde ju i det här filmklippet från Brian Harrell tidigare, där han så att säga propagerade för att man skulle skaffa sig en rumor control website. Det är ju lite grann det jag ändå frågar om här, så att säga. Björn, vad ska man göra, tycker du då, från officiellt håll för att bemöta desinformation från utländska makter? Jag vet ju då till exempel att man inom EU, då, både parlamentet och administrationen nu arbetar mycket för att ta fram strategier för att hantera och bekämpa desinformation.
Och vår organisation på Myndigheten för psykologiskt försvar återspeglar lite det här med att vi har en förmågebyggande avdelning och en operativ avdelning. Det vill säga att man behöver kunna jobba långsiktigt, underlätta för samhällets aktörer att bli bättre på det här, så att det kopplar an till deras sektorsområden etc. Och jobba brett mot civilsamhället och försöka möjliggöra. Och liksom hjälpa till med samordning, forum, sådana saker för att öka samhällets förmåga generellt. Och sen inför händelseförlopp kunna vara förberedd för specifika saker som kan ske och sen operativt kunna koordinera och agera mot det här på ett samordnat sätt. Och stödja inte minst regeringen och andra viktiga samhällsaktörer med tidsenlig information om vad som sker och råd och stöd vad gäller exempelvis strategisk kommunikation, eller i vissa fall som vi har sett internationellt, inte minst Storbritannien etc., en exponering eller attribuering av en händelse om den är riktigt allvarlig.
Hanna, jag måste fråga, det blir nästan kanske en filosofisk fråga, men du är inne på det själv här med censur och sånt. Alltså, vi uppmanas ju som medborgare, så att säga, att hela tiden vara kritiska mot den information vi får. Alltså, är den korrekt? Vem är det som är avsändare? Vad har de för syften med den här informationen och så? Samtidigt så måste man ju säga, i alla fall jag säger det, att det är ju på ett sätt lite tråkigt om människor går omkring och är misstänksamma hela tiden. Alltså man vill ju egentligen att människor ska känna tillit till den information man får i samhället. För att jag tror att det kanske leder till att fler deltar i samhällsdebatten då. Så lite grann reflektera över det. Ska man se positivt eller negativt på en ökad misstänksamhet?
Alltså jag är med dig lite där. Det är lite trist att vi ska gå runt och vara så himla kritiska hela tiden. Är det du säger sant? Och vad har du hört den informationen? Har du läst den på nätet? Och vem skrev den från början? Men som sociala medier ser ut idag så måste vi vara källkritiska. Problemet med sociala medier är att källan kan se legitim ut. Den kan se korrekt ut. Det kanske bara är så att det är en falsk persona där ute som du följer. Jag menar att stjäla publika personers identitet och influencers identitet förekommer. Även myndighetspersonals identitet har nyttjats för att sprida desinformation. Men sen kan det också vara att man manipulerar en influencer att sprida det åt den. Så att det är ju svårt. Det är ett komplicerat kommunikationslandskap. Jag tycker att det är jättetråkigt att behöva säga tänk på det där kanske inte är sant. För rätt som det så går man och tycker allting känns väldigt ifrågasättande. Och så, vi har forskare som gör det hela dagarna och de kan göra det. Det är jättebra. Men övriga kanske behöver rulla på och ha en bra vardag. Så jag håller med, det är komplext. Vi har lite andra saker vi måste titta på. Jag tycker att diskussionen och debatten om sociala medier har fastnat vid censur i mottagarledet. Och där tror jag är det största problemet. Jag tycker vi ska titta bakom och titta på plattformarnas ansvar. Vi ska titta på algoritmerna och se, får vilken aktör som helst i världen, det som jag tog exemplet med TikTok och hur man delar informationsflödena mellan olika länder, det får en ganska stor impact. Vad har de för ansvar?
Björn, har du någon kommentar på det här? Jag måste också relatera till det Brian sa i filmen. Han talade ju om att vi måste liksom ha en zero trust environment. Det låter ju inte så trevligt egentligen.
Men frågan är, och det här är en personlig reflektion, inte en myndighetsreflektion, de här senaste 3 decennierna när vi fokuserade väldigt mycket på handel och ekonomi och inte alltid kanske tänkte på att demokrati måste försvaras och det är ett arbete varje dag att möjliggöra en öppen demokratisk debatt. Det kanske är så att normalläget inbegriper tyvärr genom världshistorien att man måste ha en viss medvetenhet om det här och kunna hantera att aktörer försöker ljuga och försöker manipulera och försöker framstå som hotfulla etc. För att få sin vilja fram. Däremot så måste man ha en balans och en dialog kring det här, för att om man ser rött överallt och har ett skynke och hela tiden är på helspänn, då får vi ju ett samhälle som inte fungerar heller. Men det är en kontinuerlig aspekt att reflektera kring risker och möjligheter med ny teknologi, med samhällsaspekter som sker, öppenhet kontra lagstiftning. Det är en kontinuerlig dialog och aspekt som man måste ha i ett samhälle.
Avslutningsvis så måste jag ändå bara fråga, finns det någon specifik typ av desinformation eller kampanj som ni är mer eller mindre säkra på kommer att komma inför valet i Sverige? Alltså som ni kanske lite igenkännande kommer att småle åt och säga bara japp, där kom det. Finns det något sånt?
Jag tror den dag en så kallad expert då säger att så här blir det, då ska man dra öronen åt sig. För att är det en definierande aspekt med det här området så är det att det är på samhällsbredden, det är en all of society-aspekt och de aktörer som verkar inom det här nyttjar en mängd olika verkansmedel simultant och är opportunistiska. För att poängen är ju att så där det redan finns bördig jord. Att lansera någonting från scratch i ett område som inte är mottagligt eller en målgrupp som inte är mottaglig, det är inte bra kostnadsekonomi. Så därför så ska man nog akta sig för att säga exakt vad som kommer att ske. Och återigen, det är nog bara att gå tillbaka till december och hur overkligt det verkade om när vissa experter faktiskt lyfte att det skulle kunna bli en invasion av Ukraina.
Hanna?
Vågar man gå in i den där diskussionen? Ja, men alltså det finns ju massa saker. Vi vet ju, det kommer ju ifrågasättas. Är valet säkert? Alla de här varningarna. Nu vet jag att Valmyndigheten jobbar benhårt på kommunikation, att visa. Svenska valet är ju extremt analogt, trots att vi är så digitala. Det är så analogt så att det blir supersäkert. It's very unhackable, som vi brukar säga i hackervärlden. Att det blir väldigt svårt att hacka ett analogt val. Men de frågorna kommer ju komma. Det som jag är lite orolig för, det är kopplat till den här påverkansoperationen som har varit gentemot Socialstyrelsen och barn. Att man i de kanalerna, som nu är ganska stora och starka, och även starka internationellt som påverkar i Sverige, att man i de kanalerna börjar säga att du kan inte lita på staten, det har du ju sett tidigare. Att det är ingen idé att rösta, det är redan förbestämt, eller vad det nu kan vara för någonting. Det kan jag tycka är lite obehagligt, och det nästan förväntar jag mig att det kommer ske. För att det är så liksom man bygger en trolling på sikt. Det är ju liksom en process det här, det är ingenting som sker över en natt. Det är massa grejer på gång redan. Det är inte så att det börjar i maj, utan det är redan fullt drag där ute.
Bra. Stort tack Hanna, stort tack Björn. Paul, are you interested in having the last word here? Have you? No. Have you heard the translation in your headphones?
Yes.
If you want to give a comment or a conclusion.
I also want to thank the translators because the translators did a magnificent job. So thank you to the translators. Excellent. I've been to some places where, because I'm from New Jersey, I needed 2 translators. So not just one. Look, this is what I think we've heard. Our problems, it doesn't matter North American or Swedish, our democracies at the core are the same. Our languages may be different, our culture may be different, is different, but the same people that are coming for you are also coming for us. And I also heard, I think, that, and it's where I started the conversation, the internet and social media are the best of times, and they are the worst of times. In closing, and I heard you say respectfully that Brian's opinion of zero trust is a matter of personal opinion, and in many ways I do agree with that. If we completely come to a place in society where there is zero trust, and I'm not contradicting Brian because Brian is a brilliant, brilliant practitioner, we are in a very dark place. And as dark as things are now, and they're dark, and I think I heard you say, I heard you say in December, who thought that once again we could be in a place in Europe of genocide, a second, I'm not going to get into, it's not political, this is reality. Social media becomes everything that brings us together with this, the sharing of the pain, the sharing of the information, and social media is also that place that could very quickly break us apart. So I guess in closing, what we do have to make sure of, and when I hear about the work that you're doing with this new center, we have to really put these centers together where they work together in the democratic nations and are sharing information. Look, you said something else, and I'll close, the platforms. It is about the platforms. And I'm going to go on record to say it's about the money. I'm going to share one, I think this is a relevant story, one quick story that's going to resonate. In the United States, there's something called the Boogaloo. There was an active group called the Boogaloo. Most of you have never heard of the Boogaloo. The Boogaloo were a group of young, mostly white males that wore these cute Hawaiian shirts and spewed out what appeared to be very pro-American rhetoric. And the Boogaloo took a meme. They used Pepe the Frog, and they used some other memes, and they grew. This was 24 months ago. They grew that quick. And they came together, and they started to demonstrate, and they started to show up where there were large demonstrations. They started to show up, you're going to see where I'm going with this story, with AR-15s, and ARs and other automatic weapons. And the local police, in some cases, would greet them and go, hello. You know, they thought that they were patriotic, pro. Well, it turns out that the Boogaloo, and this is understanding, you know, the Boogaloo they were speaking the truth to each other, what they thought was the truth. They were seditionist, which I'm sure you know it well. Our version of seditionist means against the United States, against the Constitution, against democracy. And yet, law enforcement community and civil society knew nothing. They weren't reading the tea leaves. And I'm bringing this movement up for a reason. It was a small group called the Network Contagion Research Institute, which Jack is affiliated with, and young 23, 24-year-old analysts went, wait a minute, something's happening here. And they attempted to share the information with the sophisticated agencies, the important research agencies and the ABCs of government. And they went, no problem. And what I will tell you is, and I guess the moral of the story is, we have to listen to the airwaves. We have to listen to what people are saying out there. They murdered 3 police officers. They set bombs. They were extremely dangerous. It was out there. There almost isn't a mass shooting in America right now where the manifesto of the shooter is not telling his or her story online. So we have to be as up-to-date and savvy and vigilant when it comes to social media. And at the same time, and I think you heard you say, and I'll close, we also cannot shut down the voices that need to be heard because of some of the voices that are, you know, calling for violence and racism and bigotry. So I'll just close on that. But I know you wanted to say something as well.
Okay, yeah, short one then.
Just because I'm Canadian, I want to finish on a positive note, I guess. But what encourages me is when I look back at journalism, newspaper, paper newspapers, right? The ones that would get your hands dirty. There's a good movie out there right now. It's called Lost Illusions. It's from a book by Honoré de Balzac. Okay, 1789, the year of the French Revolution. Okay, is the year that one newspaper said we will do it differently. Up until then, every newspaper that was published was rubbish. It was all lies. It was all exaggerations. It was all, cynicism and all that. People would read this for fun as entertainment. One guy one day said, what if a bunch of reporters agreed that we will only publish the truth? And then people will come and read our paper. And of course, people laughed them off, okay? They said that this could never happen, okay? In other words, they self-regulated, okay? Government didn't do that. Law enforcement didn't do that. Together, they decided, let's put out some truth and let's see if there's a market for truth. And that started the world of objective journalism, and today we can say that there are still those rags out there. They're all over. But there are some that are, so to speak, accredited, if you will. They're trustworthy sources. Maybe, I don't know. At the time, of course, maybe there was 12 reporters in Paris. Today, there are 12 million kids, every minute pushing stuff out. But maybe there's space for an environment. If I had the money, I would compete with Elon Musk and start a truth social media, not the truth thing that Trump talks about, but a real one, where people agree, if they're going to participate in that space, to only post true stuff, to have their post edited, peer-reviewed, criticized, openly debate, and maybe we can then have one source of credible information that we can go into. I don't know, maybe I'm dreaming.
Keep on dreaming, Serge.
I'm Canadian.
You're Canadian.
Canadian.
Thank you, Serge. Interesting with the history of information and disinformation to back to the French Revolution.
It's not new. Yeah, it's way.
No, yeah, exactly. Okay. Thank you very much. Today's event is ending. I will really give a warm thank you to all of our participants here and to also the one looking at this streaming digitally. And before the end of today's event, I want to mention our tomorrow's public hearing taking place here at our offices between 8:30 and 12 o'clock noon. On the agenda is how to combat crime, rising crime, and how the business community can play a part in making Sweden and Stockholm a safer place. With that, my name is Fredrik Erfeldt, and on behalf of the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much for today.